What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Of course, you can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. And if you haven't yet, please make sure to subscribe as we make our way to 10,000, which would be beyond amazing. So make sure to do that if you haven't already. It's Saturday, so you know what that means. It is Scouting Report Day. I'll be breaking down everything that I learned from watching tape of the New York Jets. Of course, if you go back and listen to last week's versus the Giants, we unfortunately uncovered a lot of things that actually ended up playing a huge part in that game, and the Packers lost. So hopefully we can uncover some things this week, but hopefully that leads to a positive result as the Packers take on the Jets. Before we get into it, though, we did have some injury updates from Friday, so let's go over that first. Tipa Galeai will be out for this game, as will Christian Watson. Aaron Nagler asked Matt LaFleur in his press conference if there's some thought about maybe shutting Christian Watson down until he gets fully healthy rather than having these nagging injuries that kind of keep reoccurring. He said that is a possibility. Nothing set in stone, but that's going to be something worth keeping an eye on moving forward. As for this week, Christian Watson, as mentioned, will be out. Aaron Rodgers, great news. He is completely off the injury report and he is good to go, which was sort of expected. He was throwing fine at practice the other day, but you still love to see him off the injury report entirely. And then, of course, there's some bad news as well. Rashan Gary is listed as questionable with a toe injury. When asked about it, Matt LaFleur said he did have some level. I think he said he had a little bit of concern over it, but it actually seemed kind of like he had more concern over it. Gary did practice in a limited capacity on Friday, which usually is like if he wouldn't have practiced, that would have been a much bigger cause for concern that maybe he couldn't go, or at least maybe this was something a little bit more serious. The fact that he practiced in any capacity is a great sign. Doesn't necessarily mean that he will play on Sunday, but if this basically gives him the opportunity to, with him practicing in some capacity on Friday. So hopefully it's nothing that lingers. Hopefully it's nothing nagging. Hopefully it's something that he can play through on Sunday and play well. As I mentioned on Pack a Day Podcast Happy Hour on Friday. By the way, check that out if you missed it. But as I mentioned there, just because he plays doesn't mean he's 100% Rashan Gary. If he's 60% of himself, that certainly would affect this game as well. So we will be monitoring if he plays, and we won't know unless somebody breaks the news ahead of time, won't know until the inactives an hour and a half ahead of the game. And then if he does play, just how effective can he be? Needless to say, a massive player in this game for Green Bay and moving forward as well. Ladarius Hamilton and Kobe Jones, both on the practice squad, could be call-up possibilities this week. Remember, Tipa out, Rashan Gary questionable. You would think that there's a decent chance that at least one of them gets called up no matter what. If both of them are out, you could see both of them get called up. So we'll see, but I would think that would be Hamilton over Jones, but you never quite know what the Packers are going to do in those situations. So all things worth monitoring as the weekend progresses. That does it for injury updates. Let's get into the scouting report right away. And I want to start by saying, when I watched the Jets, it was much different than breaking down the tape of the Giants. With the Giants, you could tell a few things, like Dexter Lawrence just flashed off the screen. Like, you could tell how big of an impact he was going to have in the game. You could tell exactly what the Giants wanted to accomplish. Tons of play actions, tons of bootlegs, and Daniel Jones getting him out in space. Like, there was a very big theme to everything, and you could see some of the sort of game-wrecking players, Saquon Barkley, of course, that were going to have a real major impact. With the Jets, I think this is good news. There wasn't anything that I saw that I was concerned about, and there was no player that I watched. Breece Hall was really impressive, but outside of Hall, which you're going from Saquon to Breece Hall, that's still going to be a downgrade in some capacity. There wasn't anyone that I watched on tape where I'm like, oh man, like that's going to be a massive game-changing player in this game. I liked how the Jets played overall. Very well-coached team. I think they're going to be pesky and annoying, but I didn't get the impression that this was a team that is ultra talented, and just ultra scary or like worth worrying about. It's not to say Green Bay can't lose. Green Bay has its own issues that it has to get cleared up. And if you're doing a scouting report of the Packers, you could list a laundry list of items and reasons why you wouldn't have to be worried about them right now either. But the Jets were even a little bit different, in my opinion, than the Giants, because I didn't see anything that just popped off the page that would be like, okay, we have to really watch for this. But there's certainly things that are worth monitoring and noting nonetheless. Let's start with Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson is really interesting, and I don't think it's that dissimilar actually from Danny Dimes a week ago. Danny Jones had a great game against the Packers. I think one of the best games of his career. And one of the things that Green Bay did a poor job with was really making sure that he didn't get into a rhythm and had to go beyond his first read and go through his progressions and those sort of things. And that's going to be a similar story and issue for Green Bay with Zach Wilson this week. Zach Wilson has the ability, if he can one read and throw the ball, he can throw the ball on a line. He has he has very nice placement, good accuracy for the most part. Like, it can get a little bit shaky at times, but he can put a ball right on you, and when he's in rhythm, he can be a pretty dangerous quarterback. But if you can get him past his first read and having to go through his progressions, then he starts getting panicky, things start breaking down, and he'll buy time and kind of like scramble around like Johnny Manziel style sometimes, but he still is like panicky and like doesn't really see down the field well, and you can get to him and cause problems. He'll throw you the football. He will throw some very interceptable balls. You can get him for some sack fumbles. So there's a real opportunity if you can get some pressure on him and cause a little chaos and cause him to panic and get him off of his first read. You are setting yourself up very much for success. Now, we could have said the exact same thing about Bailey Zappi and Brian Hoyer and, Daniel Jones as well, right? So it's easier said than done sometimes. I think we're going to get a very different game plan from the Packers defense this week. But overall, you get pressure on him, you're going to have success, and he's just not comfortable in the pocket going through his progressions at this point. So Green Bay has to use that to the best of their ability. Make sure you're getting him off of his spot. Make sure you're getting him off of his first read, and then he will throw you the football. He will have some turnover-worthy plays, and you should be able to take advantage of those. So how the Packers defense plays, if they can get that pressure, and if they can take away his first read, those will all be very huge keys to this game. Number two, I think the offensive line is a legitimate weakness. Really like Elijah Vera Tucker. I think he is a very good football player. The rest of the line was not impressed with at all. I think they are not great run blockers. I think you can get to them in the passing game. I think you can blitz them, and they didn't do a great job of identifying and picking up blitzes. It's not a strong point of this team. So I think it's even worse than the Giants' offensive line. And because of that, I actually think it's going to be interesting, because there is a world where Joe Barry feels very comfortable once again saying, hey, we can play coverage. We can get Zach Wilson off of his first read. We don't need to blitz. We can get there with four guys because their offensive line's not that good. I know people are going to hate this, but if Rashawn Gary is playing, I don't hate that to begin with the caveat that I don't want to see 15 yards off the line of scrimmage and Zach Wilson can just throw his first read and and get that level of comfort and everything, right? If Jair Alexander and Rasul Douglas and Eric Stokes are up challenging those receivers, taking everything away, you've still got your two safeties over the top. Maybe you crash Darnell Savage a little bit more as a robber in this game, drop your linebackers into coverage. If you're doing that, I actually think you can get home with Kenny Clark, Jarron Reed, Rashawn Gary, and Preston Smith in this game. I think you're at a good chance of being able to do that. Now, if Rashawn Gary doesn't play, that's a horse of a different color, and you're going to have to change things up. And if there's any indication that you can't get home with those four, you're going to have to start bringing some pressure. And I'll even go further by saying, while I think you can get there with four and win with coverage, and if assuming you're pressing up and make Zach Wilson uncomfortable, still bring a couple blitzes now and then, because you need those changeups. You need to play a little bit more aggressive. So I don't think this is a scenario where you've just got to be like, you go like so far in the opposite direction and you're just blitzing like crazy, and all of a sudden you're like sort of, probably losing some contain, maybe giving up some explosives from time to time. I think you can start with coverage and rushing four more often than not, but throw some curveballs in there. And if things aren't working, then change it quickly and start bringing some of that pressure. So that's where I'd be at right now with attacking their offensive line. Number three, I do think, and this kind of goes hand in hand with what we just mentioned with both Zach Wilson and the offensive line, I do think this is a great week to play aggressive football. Talk about a quarterback who doesn't want to get past their first read. Talk about a offensive line that struggles to pick up blitzes. I do think you need to be aware of their wide receivers. I think Corey Davis and Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson, I think this is a very good wide receiver group, and they can beat you, but I'm less worried about their wide receivers because I think if you're taking away that initial read and you're bringing some pressure and you're getting to the quarterback, I'm not so concerned with Zach Wilson beating you down the field. And I do think Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore both have some run after the catch ability. Corey Davis does a little bit as well, but I'm not overly concerned with their passing offense, more based on Zach Wilson and their offensive line. So keep an eye on those, wide receivers. But again, we went all into this season thinking that Jair Alexander, Rasul Douglas, Eric Stokes are going to be one of the best corner trios in the league. I think they will be. I think they can be. But this is a game that you've got to go and match with those wide receivers. And if you can win that and you're playing more aggressive and you're getting to the quarterback, there's just no opportunity for success. So again, this all sort of goes back to how can Green Bay improve on defense? I think there's a real recipe here. There's been a recipe all year long. They haven't used it. I think they're going to use it a lot more in this game. Number 4, Green Bay once again facing some very talented running backs. We saw Saquon Barkley, we saw Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson, and I think this is another really impressive 2 running back set. I loved Michael Carter coming out of college. You can see his great contact balance, can run through contact, stays balanced, and just is a playmaker. Like he will run on Green Bay inside, outside, and you got to be aware of him. And as much as I like Michael Carter, Breece Hall even better, and he can beat you in all phases of offense. He can beat you down the field in the passing game. They will run some pony package. Quite honestly, Green Bay could take some notes from it. But these are 2 different running backs in the fact that Breece Hall can really beat you downhill or down the field as a receiver. They've gotten some explosive plays to him in that regard. Like both of these guys can be used in the screen game. They're just 2 talented running backs, and they complement each other very well also. So be very cognizant of the 2 running backs in this game. The offensive line, or lack thereof, the lack of talent on the offensive line does limit both of those running backs a bit, but they'll get those guys the ball in space, and you better make sure that Devondre Campbell, Quay Walker are having a good game, because if not, those 2 can definitely hurt you in the run game and in the pass game. I do think the Jets offense has some great success with bunches and pick plays, so we may talk about wanting to see more man-to-man, but you've got to be careful because this is a offense that's well-versed in running some man beaters and really kind of picking you apart that way. So Green Bay's going to have to change things up and keep the Jets offense on their toes a little bit and not being predictable. And then last but not least, from an offensive standpoint, they will run some trick plays. So we've already seen, a Philly special from them that led to a Zach Wilson receiving touchdown. We've seen some double passes, although on that, Zach Wilson dropped the ball, almost turned out into a disastrous turnover play, but they're not afraid to call some trick plays. So beware of that as well. Would not shock me to see the Jets call some of those on Sunday. All right, let's look at the Jets defense now. The first thing that stood out is Carl Lawson is back. Remember, he was injured against the Packers in practice a year ago, missed the entirety of the season. He is back and with a vengeance. He looked fantastic against the Dolphins. I don't think this is like a TJ Watt-esque, game breaker player that you just got to keep aware of at all times. I'm okay with Bakhtiari and Yash, starting with him one-on-one, but you need to be a little bit extra aware of him. Maybe you're keeping the tight end on that side. I don't think you need to keep the tight end to block, but just limiting the options. So even if you've got a tight end on that side, it lessens sometimes like the edge rushers' options of how they're getting to the quarterback. So I'm not saying DeGuara or Davis or Tunyon or Lewis actually have to stay in and block on Lawson, but just giving that extra, player there for him to get around before he gets to Bakhtiari or Yash, I think could be helpful. Maybe having the running back just sort of keep an extra eye, or maybe chip while they're going out in their route. I think there's some things to do there, but make sure that Carl Lawson is not beating you, because he's playing very fantastic football, and he is the type of player that I think actually could give Yash and Bakhtiari a little bit of trouble on that side as well, just with his skill set. He's a very nuanced pass rusher that'll bring multiple move sets to the table and has a lot of ways to beat you. So he is back and he is playing really great football. So Green Bay definitely needs to be aware of him. The whole Jets defense is quite honestly where Green Bay's defense needs to get to from a rally and tackle standpoint. They're all rallying to the football. They're very strong and stout at the point of attack when it comes to tackling. They will get you to the ground. You see very few missed tackles, and it's just something that they are well coached with and do very well throughout the entire course of the game. So that's something that Green Bay's going to have to work through. You're not going to get a lot of extra yards because all the Jets are flying to the football, and they will get you to the ground. Their cornerbacks are interesting. They will get a little bit grabby. They had a couple big pass interference calls this past week against Miami, but they also have great ball skills, and they will pick off passes if you give them the opportunity to do so. So the big one to keep an eye on there is, of course, rookie first-round pick Sauce Gardner. He looks fantastic. You can tell he's got the size, the speed, the athleticism, the ball skills. Aaron Rodgers had the 1 pick 6 to a rookie already this year, and was it Jack Jones? I don't think that's going to happen again, but beware of Sauce Gardner because he will jump a route, and if he gets his hand on the ball, you're not getting it back. He's going to intercept it, and he will have the ability and opportunity to take it to the house if you give him that opportunity. I do think overall, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, I don't think this defense has like great playmakers. Lawson and Gardner, probably the two that you want to keep an eye on the most, but I do think they've got solid players all over the defense. And that makes things challenging. You can either win by having a lot of playmakers, or you can win by just not having weaknesses. And I think this Jets defense is the latter. They're starting to get there. Like I said, Lawson, especially Sauce Gardner. I think Gardner is going to be a playmaker as time goes on in his career. But I think right now, this is just a Jets defense that's really sound overall. They're going to play, like I told you, they're going to get players to the ground. They're going to tackle well. They're going to rally to the football. They're going to keep everything in front of them. And they're just kind of annoying to play against in that regard. So very stout team, very few weaknesses. And Green Bay's going to have to work their butt off to get those, 12, 15, whatever play, 80-yard touchdown drives, because there's just very few spots that you can attack over and over with any level of pure success unless they have some sort of injuries throughout the course of the game. I do think you have the ability to outflank them and get to the edges. That's something they did the Jets defense did a very poor job of against the Dolphins. I think they'll miss Christian Watson in that regard, where you can bring him around on some reverses and end arounds, etc., and just having that speed to the outside and outflanking those defenders. We'll see if maybe give Amari those opportunities, maybe Romeo Doubs. We'll see, but it's just not the same as Christian Watson's speed. I do think this is an Aaron Jones game. I talked about that similarly against the Giants. I think some games will be Dillon games. I think some games will be Aaron Jones games. I think this is an Aaron Jones game. Just the way that their defense plays, I think Jones's ability to find holes quicker and dance around a little bit, win to the outside, I think that just plays much, much more into Aaron Jones's hands than it does A.J. Dillon's hands. This defensive line for the Jets loves to shoot gaps, so look for maybe an opportunity to run maybe a trap play or just some plays where you're getting them aggressively upfield and then have the ability to take advantage of that. Obviously, a running back draw would work as well. Anything that gets those players pursuing upfield, running back screen, all those things could be in play as this defense loves to attack up the field, and you should be able to counter against that a little bit. And then I do think you have the ability to run on this defense. They've been very Jekyll and Hyde with run defense. There have been a couple games where they've completely shut down their opponent. There have been a few games where they've allowed some really big yardage. So I think there's the opportunity there. When I look at them as a run defense, I didn't think they were that intimidating. Mostert last week for the Dolphins had 18 rushes, 113 yards, and a 6.3 yard average. So, and I think his longest was in the 20s. So it's not like he had like an 80-yard run or something that, sort of skewed that a bit. Overall, there are alleys there, and I think Aaron Jones is going to be able to take advantage of those. Special teams, watch out for Braxton Berrios. He is a heck of a returner. Wouldn't it just be fitting where the only group so far that has been consistent has been special teams, and then watch the offense and defense come out and play a much better brand of football this week, and watch the special teams be the one that is frustrating and Braxton Berrios goes nuts and maybe gets a touchdown. Not putting that in the universe to come to fruition, but it would just seem to be fitting a little bit. But he is a very talented returner, so beware of him. I think a couple other just general notes. I think there was a lot of fear being like, oh man, the Jets just beat the Dolphins 40-17. Man, they're coming into their own. This was a 19-17 game going into the fourth quarter, and Skylar Thompson was at quarterback the entirety of the game after the first play. this was not a blowout game. They got a couple turnovers at the end that skewed the results quite heavily in the favor of the Jets. But you look at that game, it was much more competitive, even with a Skylar Thompson at quarterback. And I think this Jets team just overall, it's not to say that they can't beat the Packers, but they were 1-2 with a very thin victory over the Cleveland Browns, really a game that they shouldn't have won. Probably should have been 0-3, and then got the Mitch Trubisky-led Steelers and the Skylar Thompson-led Dolphins, picked up a couple wins. Even that Steelers game was pretty close. So I'm not sold on the Jets, is what I'm saying there. I think this is a game, much like the Patriots and much like the Giants, that Green Bay should win, and should win probably with some level of ease. Now it's up to Green Bay to actually go out and do that. Bonus scouting report this week, and I mentioned it on Twitter as well. They have the Jets on offense at running back have Michael Carter and Breece Hall. At defensive back, they have Michael Carter and Bryce Hall. Do with that what you will. They also have a Quinnen Williams on the defensive line and a Quincy Williams at linebacker. So some fun name game stuff there that is just for my amusement only and probably does you nothing at all. But why not throw it in there as part of the scouting report at the end? That's going to do it for me today. Appreciate you listening and joining me. You guys are the absolute best. I appreciate you so freaking much. I will be right back here tomorrow with the pregame show, so make sure to check that out prior to the game. Wake up early. You don't need the Fox pregame show. You don't need the CBS pregame show. Those things are garbage. Come here, check out the pregame show. I'll have all my keys to the game, so we'll appreciate that greatly as well. I'll be right back here tomorrow, but until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.